Hello again. In this case, we're going to be matching a 1-point perspective photo, which is a little bit to the side. So if you haven't already seen the lecture in which we were matching a centered 1-point perspective photo, that's okay. We're going to be taking this from scratch, as some of you are not going to be choosing a centered vanishing point. So let's get started. First of all, we need to create a new layer here in Photoshop. So let's go to the bottom right side, and with this positive icon, we can create a new layer. And I'm going to rename this layer by just double clicking on it, height. So to be able to draw here in Photoshop, I'll be using the brush tool. So I can access this tool by just pressing the B key on my keyboard. And if I just click and drag, you can see that I can start drawing in this photo. Now let's Ctrl Z that. And if you just noticed, this brush is actually a little bit too transparent. So let's make it solid. We can do this by right clicking and selecting another type of brush. Next to soft round, we actually have hard round. So let's select this one. And I also want to change the color for my brush. So I'm going to go to the left side and double click on this square here. This will open a color picker and I'll be picking a red color. Let's go and hit OK. And if you want to scale this brush, okay, you can see that's a little bit too thick. I can hold my Alt key and my right click while dragging this brush to the left side. If I go ahead and drag it to the right side, I'll make it bigger. And if I go ahead and drag it to the left side, I'll make it smaller. Okay, so something around this. And to create straight lines here in Photoshop, I only need to press once. And then while holding my Shift key, I'll press again in another spot of the image. Alright, so why are we doing this? Because we're going to be using a reference from this photo. In this case, we have many furnitures for our height. So I can figure out some of the heights from the furniture that we see right now. For example, the chair. So from this point to this point over here, I'll have around 50 centimeters. Okay, but that's a reference which is a bit too small. So I'm going to go ahead and select one that's a little bit larger. For instance, this kitchen counter. I know that from the top all the way to the bottom over here, we will have around 1 meter. So if I just write down 1 meter, now we have this reference that will help us figure out the height of this specific interior design. So if I want to erase something here in Photoshop, I'll just press the E key for erase and I'll erase this one over here. Now notice that I'm not really managing to delete this completely. The eraser is just too soft. So up here we will have the opacity value. Right now it's at 20%. We can just click on it and drag it all the way to 100%. Okay, let's just erase it like so. Okay, so we can actually duplicate this reference that we've created all the way until we reach the ceiling. So if I go ahead and select my move tool, and you can also access it by pressing the V key, I will be able to move this measurement around. And I actually didn't erase the whole thing. I just noticed a red spot there. Let's go ahead and select the movement key again. And I can duplicate this reference that we've created by, again, holding my Alt key while pressing my Shift key, just like in 3ds Max. So let's go ahead and select it. And while holding the Shift key, I can maintain it very straight. Okay, so when we do that, we actually create a copy of our layer. So you can see in the right side that we have the height, which is our original one. And I can actually hide it by pressing in this eye icon. Up here I have the height copy, which is the one that I just duplicated, so I can just hide it like so. And now while I'm selecting this layer, I can duplicate it using the same method. So Alt plus Shift key all the way to the top there. Now I can actually make this 3 reference that we've created a single object or a single layer, if you will. So I'm going to grab all of these layers by selecting first my top one, and then by holding the Shift key, I can select the bottom one like so. And I can join them together with Ctrl plus E on our keyboard. Okay, now I'm just going to rename this to only height reference. Okay, like so. So I'm going to be a little bit more precise about this, and I can do this by using the guidelines that Photoshop provides. So if you cannot see the rulers here at the top side or at the left side, you can call them in by pressing the Ctrl plus R key. So you can toggle it like this. Now you can change the units. If I right click on the ruler and we can go for centimeters, it's not actually going to matter that much because we're only going to be using it as reference guidelines. So how do we drag in a guideline? We can just click and drag a horizontal guideline from the ruler up here, place it just where my counter starts from my floor. So at this point right here, And I can also drag in a vertical guideline by going to the left side, click and drag and place it on that same spot. Okay, so you can see that we actually didn't manage to get really precise here. I need to bring our reference a little bit downwards. So you can do this by only pressing the arrow keys on the keyboard. So I'll just be moving this down here until we meet these two lines. Okay, so let's go to the top here, and I'm going to bring in another guideline that would meet with the ceiling up here. Alright, so we basically have 3 meters because we have 3 of these, right? Now another thing that I would like to know is the width of this photo. So I can actually just clone this layer with all of these 3 values, but I'm going to be making it a little bit more tidy. So what I'm going to do is just to hide this reference layer, create another layer, and this one is also going to be called hide. So I have these 2 points here. I'm going to press my B key to call in my brush tool, and I'm going to create a circle up here. So I'm going to click multiple times and another circle down here. Now I'm going to connect both of these, and I can do this by just reducing the scale of my brush and pressing once in the middle of this circle down here and then pressing up here. So I create this line. Now it's way more tidy, precise, and I'll be able to just clone this reference again, and I can do that by just using a simple Ctrl+C to copy it and then a Ctrl+V to paste it. But another method that I use is just by pressing Ctrl+J while selecting my layer, and now if I want to move this new layer, I'll be pressing Ctrl+T keys. Now I can see that I've created this control point, and I can actually just move it over here. Okay, so how can I rotate this? You can see that when I approach these control points, this arch appears. So let's rotate it, and while holding my shift key, I can actually snap it to 90 degrees like so, just like in 3ds Max. Okay, and now I'm going to place it down here, and if I just move in closer, and you can just zoom in by pressing the Alt key and scrolling inwards. Okay, now I'm going to just move it so that we can be a little bit more precise about this. Okay, so we actually noticed that the width of the space has more than 3 meters. Now the next step to do is just to find out where our vanishing point really is. So let's create another layer, and this time our layer is going to be called vanishing point, and we can abbreviate that by just typing in VP. Alright, now let's go ahead and press the B key for our brush, and we can just make it a tiny bit larger. And if you cannot see your brush, it's because you have your caps on. So by turning them off, you will be able to see your brush. Okay, so let's just see where these vanishing lines are, and I'm going to start from this side. Okay, like so. So click once, and while holding your shift key, you will click once more over here. And now let's go to this side, and this can take just a little bit of time just to get used to. Try and follow the edges from the actual photo. I'm going to go for this one because the edges that are a bit smooth will not give me a precise result, so I'm going to go for the ones that are straight. Okay, so if I just continue this roughly over here, a tiny bit more precise. Alright, so we're going to be having our vanishing point in this area. I'm going to go ahead and create another layer, which is going to be my real vanishing point. So VP2 will do. So let's pick our brush. Let's make it a tiny bit bigger, and let's just create our vanishing point there. So now in my VP layer, I can actually just hide it. Okay, and there we have our vanishing point. So I'm actually going to use this point, and I'm going to reduce the brush size to create a line which will let me determine where is the width of this space by using these 2 edges here. So this width is actually going to be all the way over here. Okay, so we need to figure out how much distance there is between this point here, which we know it's going to be 3 meters, and this point over here. So let me just create another point there. All right, so there's a simple solution to that. We can actually hide everything except for our line that we're trying to solve. So we're going to be isolating it. So we know that the hide copy is our width. So let's change its name by double clicking on it and type in width. We can isolate it by clicking on this eye icon while holding your Alt key, like so. And I actually don't need these reference lines anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and grab my move tool and drag them all the way back to their rulers. So this one goes up here, and this one will go up here too. Okay, so what we can do is to divide this line 4 times. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab my brush tool, and first of all, I'll be creating a vertical line roughly in the middle. Doesn't have to be that precise. It's better if we just use a circle rather than a vertical line, I figure. And now I'm going to pick the midpoint from these 2 points and finally over here. Okay, nice. So each one of these segments are going to be 75 centimeters until we get all the way over here, which is 3 meters, right? Now, by using this reference, I'm going to create another layer that's going to be called 75 centimeters. And now by using my brush tool, I'm actually going to be grabbing this point over here and this one over here and making a connection between them. Okay. All right, great. So let's just bring in all of the layers again. So let's turn them on. We actually don't need this one, and our vanishing point over here. There we go. Okay, so let's bring our 75 centimeters all the way over here. Okay, so it's roughly 3 meters with 70 centimeters. All right, so we've determined the height and width of the space, which is 3 meters in height by 3.7 meters in width. One more thing that we gotta figure out is the approximate length of this space, and we can do that by just using a reference dimension from anything in our photo. In this case, I'm going to be using this void that seems to be a corridor that goes to the rooms. So we can take this reference, and it's not really necessary to write it down. We can say that we should have around 1 meter in width in this void here. So actually let's do it just in case. So I'm going to be using this length here, which is going to be around 1 meter. And we can also be a little bit more creative about this by finding out other measurements, such as this additional detail in the ceiling. So we can probably figure out these dimensions. So let's go and do that. If I go here to my height reference and just unhide it by clicking on this eye icon, we can see that if this measurement from this point all the way down to here, it's 1 meter, this means that more or less and 50% of this line. So let's go inside this layer and bring in a brush tool. So at this midpoint, we will have 50 centimeters and 50 centimeters. So again, if I divide this segment into 2 parts, I'll find out that this side will have 25 centimeters and this one at the top will have 25 centimeters. And this additional dimension, we can make a rough estimate. So this is 50%, and all the way over here, we can say that this detail in the ceiling will have around 40 centimeters. So if we take a look into the left side, we see the same type of design here. So we can actually say that this support at the left side is going to be roughly 40 centimeters. It could even go to 50 centimeters. So I'd say that the support here will have between 40 and 50 centimeters. So let's go ahead and hide everything. I'm going to bring in my guidelines again, and I'll position them with these 2 vertices of my column, like so. All right. And now you see that when these 2 meet, so I'm going to just create another layer and hit the B for my brush. You can see that these 2 points are meeting with this design from the kitchen counter. And if we count these panels that this geometry has, we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if this measures around 50 centimeters, we can just multiply. So 5 times 6 is 30. This means that this kitchen counter will be around 3 meters. Alright, so if we get a bit more creative, we can determine other dimensions that will help us figure out all of the dimensions from this space. Therefore, it's going to be making our lives a little bit easier when we get to 3ds Max. Okay, but these are just rough dimensions. The one that matters the most is the height and the width. So let's go ahead and drag this photo into 3ds Max. Alright, so the first step that we need to do is to know the dimensions of our photo. So if you just click once and leave your mouse there, you'll see that the dimensions of this image is 1500 by 1000. So if you cannot see the dimensions here, you just have to right click, go into the image properties, and now details, and down here we will have the image. So we see that the height has 1000 pixels and the width 1500 pixels. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. And now let's open 3ds Max. Once here in 3ds Max, we only have to click and drag our photo to this viewport. So let's do that. Let's click and drag it over here. And now we want to drag it as a viewport background, as this is not an HDRI. So let's uncheck the environment map and click OK. Let's go inside this viewport and we can see that the image is stretched. That's because we haven't typed in the dimensions that we already know. So let's go ahead into the render setup, and in the command tab, in the output size, we have to change the HDTV to a custom mode. And here we actually need the width to be 1500 and the height 1000. Okay, let's just close this. And when we just press Shift plus F key, we will crop this viewport with our dimensions. Alright, so now by using the grid here that we usually just hide it, let's just place this grid roughly where it matches this perspective. So I'm going to zoom out, and with the Alt key plus the center button of my mouse, I'm going to roughly place this to match the perspective of this photo. So now by creating a box, we're going to be typing in the dimensions that we got from Photoshop. So let's go ahead and create this box, and within its parameters, we note that the height is 300 centimeters, the width is going to be 370 centimeters, and the length we're going to be leaving it as it is. Okay, so I'm going to also be placing my camera just to match the back wall, okay, roughly there. Now the length, we can just leave it at 1 meter, 100 centimeters, and let's just try and place this box on the back wall here. Okay, this should do it for the moment. And what I'm going to do next is to call in a physical camera. I'm not going to be using my Corona camera. I'll be going into the Create tab, and down here I have cameras. And if I go over here, we have the Create Physical Camera from View. So let's just select it. And now you can see that this camera has another type of shape. And if I just go inside of its parameters, so let's select the camera by going to the same spot there. I'm going to collapse all of these except for the perspective control. So we have this additional parameters that we can control. For example, the lens shift in horizontal and vertical. I also have the auto vertical tilt correction option, so I'm going to turn it on. And again, while selecting this box, I'm going to be bringing it so that my camera is inside my space. So right click and convert to edit poly. Let's bring it inside. And now if I go ahead into my camera again, so select camera, and let's go into the perspective control, I can start playing with my horizontal parameters. So one thing that I do need to change is the height of my camera, because it's all the way up here, as you can see. So I'm going to be selecting it and bringing it down so that we roughly match the perspective there. So basically what we need to do is just to match this edge here with the edge over here from our vanishing point. And we can do that by playing with the horizontal values and also by moving our target. So I'm going to just select my target, and also with my camera, I can actually start bringing it like so. Okay, so we're almost there. And the horizontal, we need to just drag it out a little bit like so. And we don't need to be really precise about this. It's almost impossible for you to match the perspective perfectly with a photo unless you're using a 2-point perspective, which in that case you should go to that specific lecture, but it's a little bit easier than trying to match the 1-point perspective. Okay, so let's go ahead and move this target a little bit over here until we get really close to matching this left edges. Okay, so let's select the whole camera there, bring it in like so. Okay, now what I need to do is take this camera and move it a little bit further out so that we start matching it with our box at the back. Okay, let's just grab this camera again and move it a little bit to the side. Okay, let's go inside the Corona Physical Cameras options again. Just get rid of that, select camera. Okay, let's just place it really carefully, like so. All right, we're almost there. So if I just use the wheel of the mouse, I can also move the camera. So we're getting very close, and the only thing that we need to do is to change the height of the camera. So let's select it and let's bring it down a bit. Just a tiny bit more. And there we go. Now we need a bit more of width here, so I'm going to drag the camera a little bit up again, like so, and I'm going to select the face from one of the sides and drag it out until I'm meeting the vanishing line there. Let's actually go inside this viewport and F2 just to see through the face, and there we go. Now this face over here, it's better to go into another viewport to be a bit more precise about this, and let's just drag it out. Okay, now with this I'll be just lowering the height of the camera just a tiny bit more. And there we go. Now the face just needs a little bit more correction. Let's bring it in a bit more. Okay, now that we've matched the perspective, it's time to bring in a Corona camera. So by using the same viewport that we're in, we're going to be going here to create Corona camera from the view. We usually go and create the Corona camera from scratch, if you will, which is the first option, but this time we're going to be using this one. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and delete the physical camera. So make sure that you're deleting the physical camera and not the actual Corona camera. And we also want this camera to be inside our interior. So I'm just going to select all of the vertices here and drag them until my camera is inside. Okay, great. So just a small. Okay, so if we want to be a little bit more precise about this, I'm going to select my camera. I'm going to right click and select camera target and bring it up a tiny bit. Okay, I'm going to move this like so. So be careful not to be messing around with this too much. I'm just being a little bit more precise about this. You don't have to be this precise. It's really not worth it, but just for the sake of the lecture. Okay, so now with this, we can actually start to model our scene. So the first thing that I would recommend for this is to go ahead and model this counter. So I'm going to grab my box, and you can see how well this is matched. Okay, and let's go into its parameters. It should be 100 centimeters in height. So let's just bring it like this. Okay, and the length, we said that it's going to be around 300 centimeters. So that's actually way off. And we also need to bring in a box to measure this width. So let's go ahead and create a box. Okay, let's go into its parameters, and here in its length, let's just type in 100, and you can see that this is way too much. So let's increase it to see how much this really is. Okay, so it's around 2 meters 50. Let's actually just go for 150 centimeters for this reference. There we go. So you can see that we're off for quite a few centimeters. For now, we can just delete these references. And there's actually an easy fix for this. We only have to go into the Corona camera's parameters, and inside the focal length, we need to change it to something a bit more realistic. We've already said that a good focal length is between 17 millimeters and 25 millimeters. So let's go ahead and type in 25, and don't worry, we haven't lost our perspective. We only need to bring the camera closer. So let's just go outside into another viewport. Select our camera, make sure that you're selecting only the camera and not the target or the whole camera, and let's move it closer until our perspective is back on track again. Okay, if we move to the viewport. Okay, let's just move it out just a tiny bit. Okay guys, so there we have it, and we can actually start modeling. Let's again start modeling this counter. So let's go into the box. Let's put in some parameters. So we have 1 meter in height, and you can see now that the length, it's almost 300 centimeters, which is something that we figure out in Photoshop. So we're in the right track. Let's go ahead and make sure that we also have a decent dimensions for this void over here. That probably goes to the rooms again. So let's go into those parameters. We have around 240 centimeters in height, and in its length we should say that it has 150 centimeters. Now all of the dimensions make way more sense. So first of all, I'm going to be creating this void. So let's select it, and we can actually just drag all of this space in again so that it's not so long. And now by connecting these two edges up here, I can start splitting this face and creating this void over here. So let's go ahead into the edit edges and connect them. It's going to be 2 connections. Okay, so I'm going to grab this edge and bring it all the way over here. And now this edge that we just created, I'm going to bring it here. Okay, now I'll be connecting these two. So if I go out into another viewport, let's just delete this reference box and let's connect these 2 edges like so. I'm only going to be connecting it once, and I'll be bringing it all the way down here. Okay, so now that we've connected both of these, let's just delete this face. So if I go into our clay mode, we're left with something like this. Okay, let's go actually into our clay mode, F4. Okay, let's grab the counter and start modeling it. So right click and convert to edit poly. I'm going to grab the top face there, and now this other face like so. Right click and inset this. Let's just make it 5 centimeters. Okay, right click again and extrude it inwards. Okay, let's check this. Extrude it inwards like so. Okay, now I'm going to be creating these panels here. So connect them, and actually these are the wrong ones. Let's grab the vertical ones. Okay, let's connect them by, I believe it was 6 or 5 rather. Alright, so right click and chamfer them so we can create the separation between them, and I can go ahead and separate them by 1 centimeter. We don't need any segments in between, so let's keep it at 0 and check them. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just to extrude them inwards too. So actually let's just pick the faces, right click and extrude them inwards. -10 will do it. Doesn't really matter as we're not going to be seeing them anyways, but there we go. I can also start creating this detail at this side. So let's connect them by 2 times. Again, I'm going to select this edge and bring it over here, and this one over here like so. So I'll be connecting them once again. So if I go to another viewport, make sure that you're actually connecting this edge here and not the one that creates the void. So I'll be using these 2 edges. Now connect them, and ×2 will be okay. So the first one will go up here, and the second one will go all the way down here. So I'm going to select the face like so, extrude it, and inwards will do around 40 centimeters. Okay, so we actually need to create some kind of wall here. So I'm going to grab the border while holding my shift key. I can drag it like so until I'm meeting the same dimensions as our reference photo. Okay, so for this specific arch, we need to create it with a spline. So let's go into a lateral view, and I'm going to just press the G key to get rid of that annoying grid. I no longer need it now. So let's go into our shapes and splines, and I actually need a reference here. So I'm going to select these 2 edges, go into my viewport and connect them once again. I'll be pressing the check button and moving this in the Y axis so that I can have the width as a reference point. Okay, like so. Let's go again to the lateral view, and so this is going to be our void. So let's go ahead and create a rectangle. Okay, and by grabbing these two vertices, and you can see that I cannot grab the top vertices because it's not actually a spline, so right click, convert to edit spline. Let's select the vertices at the top, and let's go to the geometry tab. Down here we will have the fillet option, so I'm going to increase it all the way like so, and let's bring this spline over here, and it's actually a little bit taller, so let's grab all of those vertices again, and there we go. Now the line is actually breaking, so we need to add an extra interpolation. So let's go ahead into the interpolation tab, and the number of steps, we can increase it all the way to 100, and if you feel like this is a bit too much, you can leave it at around 64. Okay, so I'm going to just add a shell modifier to this spline and increase the outer amount, and I'll be dragging this inside of this face here. So let's detach this wall, and I can do that by going to the edit geometry while selecting it. Obviously in here we have the detach option. I'm not going to detach it as element or clone. I want to detach the whole face. So let's click OK, and let's isolate both of these geometries. And now what I need to do is just to use the Pro Boolean options. So let's select this wall, and first of all we need to change the pivot because it's all the way out here. So let's go into the hierarchy, affect pivot only, and center to the object. Okay, let's deselect the affect pivot only. Now let's go into the standard primitives and change this to compound objects. We will now have the Pro Boolean options. I'm going to select it and start picking. I'm going to pick this specific arch, and we're going to be left with something like this. And right click and convert this to an edit poly. Okay, the only thing that I need to do is just to get rid of this face like so. So delete it, and there we go. So let's go into the clay mode once again, and we can actually add a shell modifier now to this geometry like so. Okay, so let's go back inside, right click and unhide all. Don't forget to save your progress because 3ds Max likes to crash with no reason at all. So let's save it. Okay, now let's go to the back wall, and I'll be connecting these two edges. So let's go to the edit edges and connect them. Okay, by 2 will be fine because I want to create this void from the window, and let's just place them like this. We actually need to create an inset so that the window is actually not meeting with the floor. So right click and inset, and I'll be inserting this around 10 centimeters. Now let's just delete this face like so, and there's our void for our window. Now on the left side, if you look closely, the only curvature in here is the actual furniture. Where the furniture is not curved, it's just a box. We can select both of these edges once again and connect them. So 2 will be fine. Let's go ahead into another viewport and place this correctly. So it's going to be around here, the first one, and the other one. Let's go ahead into this viewport to make it a bit more precise around this point. Okay, select it, right click and extrude it. And let's extrude it all the way until we meet with the back edge. There we go. Now we can also start connecting these two edges so that we can create the window here. So connect it, and 2 will be fine. We can't actually see the width of the window over there. Let's place it where the window starts. There we go. And now by selecting these two edges, I can create the bottom part of my window and also the top part. So let's connect it. By 2 will be fine. I'm going to select the top edge all the way up here and also down here. I'll be just deleting this face for now. Okay, so we have something like this. Okay, so for this curved furniture, we can use just a spline. So let me just show you. Let's go to the top part, and by going into the shapes, actually splines, let's select the line in here, and we basically have something like this. So it's perpendicular at the back, and only in the front we have this curvature. We can just do it while clicking and dragging our spline. Let's just click once and close the spline. Now, while selecting the vertices, we can match the vertices so that nothing is being distorted there. Okay, now I'm going to add a extrude modifier. And let's see how much we need. Okay, so it's around 90 centimeters. And there we go. You can be a bit more precise about this if you just use the fillet. So let's go ahead and create another example. So if we have the back part, which is perpendicular, and then we create another vertex at the middle point, and we select the mid vertex, we go into the geometry, and in here with a fillet, we can actually curve this to be a bit more precise, like so. So let's just delete this one. So that's one way of doing it. And let's place this guy here and add an extrude modifier again of 90 centimeters. If you look closely, we actually need to match a little bit better this square at the back because it's a bit tilted, isn't it? So for this, I'm going to once again go to my Corona camera, and down here we will have something similar to what we had in the physical camera. So first of all, we need to automatic vertical tilt this, and in our horizontal parameters, we can just make this a little bit more precise, like so, okay? Now, next up, we need to move our targeted a little bit until we match this better. Okay, so let's just play around this a little bit more until we have a straight match there. Now let's select the Corona camera again, right click and select camera target. I'll be fixing this a little bit better. So if you want to keep on going and modeling this interior, it's going to serve you as practice. However, I suggest you to go ahead and start matching your own reference photo so that you can get started as soon as possible with your modeling. This is it for this lecture. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you soon.